The snow had fallen thick that winter, so thick it muffled even the mourning doves. Pines sagged under the weight, their limbs creaking like old bones, and the wind moved with the hush of something holy. Along the narrow pass where freight wagons once rolled, a woman trudged alone with firewood tied to her back, her boots vanishing with every step beneath the soft white hush. She didn't speak much to people anymore. The quiet suited her. The trees, the wind, the hush between snowflakes, they never asked where her husband went, or why she wore his coat 2 winters after the burial. Folks had long stopped wondering why a girl like her ended up in a cabin near the ridge, tending goats and boiling pine bark for medicine. She was the kind of woman folks passed over without meaning to, like the dull glint of silver in the creek. Easy to miss unless you were looking. She nearly missed the bodies, too. At first, she thought it was a broken log cart, the way it slumped half buried in snow at the bend. But then she saw the flash of a boy's boot, crooked, barely moving. Her breath stilled. She dropped her woodpile and ran. The man was lying half on the child, one arm thrown over the boy like a final shield. Both were blue-lipped and soaked through, eyes closed, snow crusted thick across the collars. The boy had a pulse, thin and flickering, but the man's skin felt like stone. She didn't pause to think. She dragged the boy first, stumbling as she went, whispering soft things like, "You'll be all right, little one, we're almost there, just hold on," even though her thighs burned and her fingers screamed from the cold. When she returned for the man, she hesitated only long enough to feel the shallow push of air at his nose. Alive. Barely. Back at her cabin, the fire roared hotter than it had in weeks. She stripped them both of wet clothes and wrapped them in her bedding, cheeks flushed from the closeness, the urgency. The boy stirred first, a soft sound, no words, just a child's fragile whimper. She pressed a tin mug of broth to his lips, wiped the sweat from his brow, and didn't ask anything more. She worked through the night, changing wet cloths, turning the man to keep his lungs clear. He coughed once near dawn, eyes fluttering open just long enough to see her face and mutter, "You fool," before slipping back into fever sleep. She smiled, faint and tired. "Maybe," she murmured, "but I'm warm, and you're not dead." The boy woke properly on the second day, eyes wide and searching. He looked around the small cabin, shelves lined with dried roots and pine cones, a rocking chair patched with hand-sewn cloth, a pair of boots by the fire, and said nothing. She handed him a cup. "You remember your name?" The boy nodded slowly. "Daniel." "All right, Daniel," she said softly, like she was testing how his name felt in the air. "I'm May." He drank, hands trembling, then whispered, "That's my father." May glanced at the cot, where the man now breathed in harsh, rattling gasps. "He's still fighting. That's something." The boy didn't ask where they were, or how far from town, or who she was to have found them in a place no one lived but ghosts and goats. He only said, "You saved us." May shook her head. "I did what I could. That's not the same." Outside, the snow began to melt in slow rivulets down the roof. She watched them trace silver lines across the window, watched Daniel wrap her old quilt tighter around his small frame, and wondered what kind of man had brought a child through such a pass in a storm. The father woke 3 days later, with a cough like cracked leather and eyes too sharp for a man so weak. He tried to sit up and failed. May didn't smile this time. "You're at my place," she said simply. "You'll live. Don't thank me." He narrowed his eyes, brow furrowed in hard lines. He had the look of a man who owned too much land and trusted too few people. Proud. Or angry. It was hard to tell, with men like him. Daniel moved to his side, without a word. Their hands met briefly, rough calluses against smaller fingers. "You live alone?" the man rasped. May nodded. 3 years now. He looked around, took in the herbs drying on strings, the tin pots, the ash bucket by the fire. "That husband of yours dead?" "He's gone," she said, voice like falling snow. "Same difference." The man said nothing for a long while. May busied herself stirring a pot of bark syrup and tallow. Daniel sat in the corner, carving something into the wooden wall with a stub of charcoal. His hands shook less now. He was stronger. Quieter, too. "I suppose you want money," the man said finally. May paused. "No," she said. "I wanted you not to die in front of your boy." That's all. He looked at her then, really looked, like he was trying to solve a riddle no one asked him to solve. "You're a strange one," he muttered. May met his gaze without blinking. "You're not the first to say that." The man didn't speak again until nightfall. When she came back from the woodshed, the fire casting golden light across the room, he was watching Daniel sleep. "He doesn't have his mother's strength," he said quietly, "but he's got her heart." May didn't ask what that meant. She sat in her rocker and pulled a blanket over her lap. "He was sick before this," he added. "Too many fevers. Too much travel. Doctors don't help." May looked at the boy, the faint pink returning to his cheeks, the steadier rise and fall of his chest, and said, "Rest helps. Kindness does too." The man grunted, but it didn't sound like disagreement. Later, as the fire died to coals and the hush of the pines returned, Daniel stirred in sleep and muttered May's name. The man heard it, his brow furrowed, but he said nothing. That night, May sat long after the others slept, hands still in her lap, eyes watching the flicker of dying flame. She didn't know what these men would bring when they left, if they'd speak her name in town or forget her face the moment the snow melted. It didn't matter. She wasn't made for being remembered. She was made for that quiet kind of mercy, the kind that saves and stays silent. But something in her chest stirred when Daniel whispered her name. Something she hadn't felt since before the last goodbye, before the fever, before her life folded inward like a burned letter. She let the feeling settle. She didn't name it. And in the quiet, she smiled, not because she hoped for anything, but because for the first time in years, something had hoped for her. The thaw came slow, one careful drip at a time. The snow pulled back like a tired tide, revealing broken twigs, hoof prints long frozen in place, and the battered wheel of an old freight cart beside the ridge. Spring hadn't arrived yet, not fully, but it whispered around the edges, a hint of promise in the wind. May had begun gathering again, bark for tinctures, early roots for soup. Daniel followed sometimes, quieter than before, but more present. He asked about plants, about birds. She didn't mind. He never interrupted her silences. The father, Josiah, she had learned, was mending fast. Too fast, maybe. Men like him didn't know how to stay still. Each day he stretched farther, stood longer, watched more. She could feel it, the turning, like when animals grow restless before a storm. On the 10th morning, they were gone. The bed stripped, the door left ajar, the boy's carving knife gone from the shelf. No note. No thanks. Just emptiness, as sudden as a bird startled from the trees. May didn't cry. She hadn't expected them to stay. But something inside her pressed heavy against the quiet. Not sorrow, not anger, but that old, bitter ache of being forgotten again. She packed herbs into jars, swept the floor, fed the goats, and whispered to herself, like always, you were never meant to be chosen. The coach arrived 3 days later. It came around noon, black-lacquered and drawn by 2 tall bays, the kind bred on river ranches with names carved into brass. Its wheels barely stirred dust from the trail. They'd been oiled and cleaned for the journey. May stood by the water barrel, her hands red from scrubbing. She heard it before she saw it, the polished rhythm of wealth. The door opened slow. Josiah stepped out first. His coat was finer than before. His boots caught the light. Behind him stood a man in a wide hat with ink on his hands, some kind of scribe. She said nothing. Josiah didn't greet her. He looked around as though trying to spot some deficiency he'd forgotten. Then he met her eyes. "You saved my boy." May shrugged. "You didn't have to." "No," she said, "I didn't." He stepped forward, slowly, like he wasn't quite sure what to say. "You want money?" "No." He looked irritated. "A gift, then. Livestock? Land? You name it. I didn't do it to be owed." Josiah frowned, as if the absence of transaction unsettled him. "He's not strong," he said, changing tack. "But he's smart. And kind. Too kind. Doesn't understand how this world works. But he remembers who saves him. Talks about you more than he ever talked about his mother." May said nothing. Josiah's eyes narrowed, as if trying to pierce the quiet inside her. "That boy's my heir. My only. He needs a guide. A woman who can steady him. May laughed, soft and strange. You came to offer me a job? He didn't flinch. I came to offer you a future. She stared. His voice dropped, low and serious. He's 16. I know it's odd, but I need someone beside him I can trust. Someone to give him strength. A wife, not just a name. You'll have comfort. A roof. Respect. A new name, if you want it. Silence fell heavy. She didn't ask why he wasn't marrying the boy off to a ranch girl from town. She knew why. Town girls wanted lace, parties, rings. Not strange women who lived alone and knew how to stitch wounds in the dark. Does he even know? She asked. Josiah's jaw tightened. He agreed. May didn't believe it, not fully. But there was something in her that leaned forward. Some wild, flickering thing that wanted to see what this boy had become now that the fever was gone. So she said without looking up, Fine. Josiah blinked. Fine. I'll come. She packed her things slow, careful. Left behind most of it. The jars, the kettle, the chair with its half-mended cushion. She took only a small case, a knife, and a woven shawl she'd made when her husband was still breathing. The ride down the valley was too smooth. She didn't trust it. Rich men made everything quiet, not because life was peaceful, but because it was contained. When they reached the ranch, it spread before her like a picture torn from another woman's dream. Acres of green, fences that stretched into fog, a house with glass windows, and a porch wide enough for dances. Daniel stood at the edge of the porch. Taller now, healthier, hair combed back like someone else's son. He didn't smile, but he stepped forward, nervously smoothing his shirt, and whispered, I asked him not to do it like this. May's heart stirred in a way she hadn't expected. Not because he was handsome or bold or filled with words, he wasn't, but because of the sorrow in his voice. I didn't mind, she said gently. They married under the aspens, with no guests but the birds. A ranch hand read from a book. Josiah stood stiff and proud, his arms crossed like he was guarding a victory. Daniel barely touched her hand. She barely looked at him. They didn't kiss, didn't linger. When it was done, Josiah nodded once and turned to the house. The scribe handed her papers, land agreements, name changes, a thin gold band in a wooden box. She didn't open it. Daniel lingered. You don't have to wear it if you don't want. May tucked the box into her case. I'll decide tomorrow. The room they gave her was at the end of the hall. Clean, bright, with embroidered sheets and a window facing the hills. Daniel's room was down the corridor. He didn't visit. She didn't expect him to. That night, May sat on the edge of the feather bed, still wearing her shawl, and thought about the girl who had once dreamed of being chosen. Here you are, she whispered to the hush. Chosen at last, for someone else's reasons. But as she lay down, something strange stirred. Not sorrow, not quite hope, maybe just curiosity. Because somewhere in that grand house, a boy she'd once saved was walking those halls, not sick, not silent, and maybe, just maybe, he remembered her not as a debt, but as something softer, something real. She closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come quick, but it came. And in the stillness, she thought she heard his voice through the walls, faint, uncertain, calling her name like a question. And she did not turn away. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet May knew from her cabin in the trees, but a polished silence, hollowed out, varnished, purposeful. The kind that echoed when you set a teacup down or when your boots struck polished wood. Even laughter, when it came at all, sounded far away, like it didn't belong. The days passed in gentle, confusing rhythms. Meals appeared without her lifting a hand. A maid named Rosalind brought fresh linens each morning and looked surprised every time May thanked her. There were no goats to milk, no firewood to chop, no reason to open her knife but for slicing bread that someone else had already baked. She tried to help at first. She swept the porch before dawn, peeled apples, offered to mend torn sleeves. But the staff would intercept her, hands fluttering, voices polite but firm. That's not for you, Mrs. Murrin. Mrs. Murrin. The name fit her mouth like a dry stone. She wandered the halls instead, fingers brushing banisters and window frames. Paintings of faraway mountains hung in solemn rows. A grandfather clock ticked in the main room like the slow, tired heart of the place. Daniel passed her often, always with a book under his arm. He would nod, sometimes pause, ask if she needed anything. But their words remained shallow, pleasantries caught between unfamiliar walls. She noticed things, though. How he paused before entering the library. How he chewed the inside of his cheek when nervous. How he always stepped aside in the hallway, as if still afraid to take up space. In the third week, she followed him outside. He sat beneath the willow by the orchard, sketching. His hands were ink-stained, his boots muddy, a pencil balanced between his teeth. She didn't speak at first, just stood near the trunk, arms crossed. He didn't flinch. "I thought you'd be reading," she said at last. "I was," he replied, not looking up. "But books don't always say what I need them to." She stepped closer. "What do you need them to say?" "That I'm not a mistake." The words fell between them like snow. Gentle, final, real. May sat beside him. Not close, but near enough to feel the wind change. "You're not," she said. Daniel looked up, eyes bright but wary. "He only married me to you, so I'd have someone strong beside me. He thinks I'm weak." "You were half dead in a storm and still managed to carry your father on your back," she murmured. "If that's weakness, I don't know what strength is." He smiled, faint and unsure. "You're not what I expected." "I was never what anyone expected." A silence settled again, this one softer. Daniel returned to sketching. A tree, a bird, the curve of the distant fence. May watched his hands move and thought about the gap between them. Not in years, she was barely 5 ahead, but in what life had carved into them. She was all scar tissue and worn edges. He was still smoothing into shape. But he was kind, and he listened. And for the first time, she saw that he hadn't agreed to this marriage because he was obedient, but because he hoped she might be someone worth knowing. She left before he did, the scent of spring clinging to her shawl. That night, she found a tray left outside her door. On it sat 2 books, poetry, the kind that came from wild countries, and a cup of rosehip tea. A note in Daniel's steady hand. "If you ever get tired of silence, these help me fill it." She held the note longer than she meant to. The next morning, they met again by the stables. He offered to walk her through the orchard. She accepted. They talked of goats and stories, and how neither of them had ever liked peaches. The distance between them narrowed. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something honest. Still, not everyone in the house was pleased. Whispers followed her when she walked past the parlor. Josiah's steward, a thin-lipped man named Ellison, watched her with the suspicion of a banker guarding coin. She overheard it one afternoon. 2 maids speaking low near the laundry room. "Married the boy to a ghost, they say. She doesn't talk much, just stares, like she's counting who she'd bury next." May didn't confront them. She didn't need to. She'd heard worse. And besides, she knew ghosts weren't always the ones who walk silent. Sometimes they were the ones who smiled too easily and slipped poison in your tea. She kept to herself. But the loneliness returned. Different now. No longer her old companion. This was something sharper. Because this time, someone saw her. And yet still, she floated through rooms like smoke no one wanted to breathe. Until the night she found Daniel waiting in the main hall, his hands clasped in front of him, eyes on the floor. "I've been reading about you," he said. She blinked. "About me?" "In the ranch records. In the notes my father keeps. You helped deliver a baby once. And you stitched a man's leg shut when the doctor was too drunk to show. You've been saving people a long time." May leaned against the banister. "That was before." "It's not before anymore," he said, lifting his eyes. "You're here now. With me." Something in her chest pulled tight. Not painful, just uncertain. "I don't know how to be a wife," she admitted. Daniel stepped forward. "Then we'll learn slow. No rushing. No pretending." She wanted to ask why he was being kind. Why he, a boy with land and name and books, would offer patience to a woman who once slept beside firewood to keep warm. But instead, she said, "All right." From then on, he brought her small things, a wildflower pressed in a book, a scrap of paper with a poem scrawled crooked, an orange peeled and sliced like a sunburst. She didn't know what to give back, so she offered presents. A warm hand resting on a table edge, a laugh real if rare, and once, when he fell asleep beneath the willow, she laid a blanket over his shoulders without waking him. The house still echoed, but now sometimes the echoes sounded gentler, like the place was slowly learning how to hold warmth again. One evening, she passed Josiah in the corridor. He looked her over like checking if a saddle had worn well, then said, "I suppose the boy likes you. Be careful with that." She didn't reply. He added, voice cool, "Don't forget who gave you this life." May met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I didn't forget who tried to take it from me, either." He turned without a word. That night, as she lay in bed, the silence felt different. Less like loneliness, more like waiting. And for the first time, she hoped the echo in that great house would carry something good back to her. The storm rolled in without ceremony, a low growl across the valley, dark clouds folding in like bruised linen. The sky lost its color, swallowed by charcoal and threat. May stood on the porch, her shawl tight around her shoulders, watching the wind ripple through the orchard, bending branches with impatient hands. There was something in the air beyond rain, something old and restless, as though the land itself were remembering an unfinished quarrel. Daniel had gone to town that morning, hoping to fetch paint for the barn. He had started drawing again, not just for himself, but for the house. Sketches of animals, of trees, even of her, though he hadn't said it aloud. She'd found one on the table once, a woman in profile, shawl caught by wind, face turned toward mountains. Now she waited for his return, counting thunderclaps and measuring the ache in her ribs like a barometer. She had known storms like this before, not weather, but men. And she sensed one riding in again. Josiah arrived before the rain. His coach glistened like oil beneath the darkening sky, his coat dry despite the wind. He stepped onto the porch without asking, boots leaving a trail of dust where no welcome had been laid. May straightened. "You weren't expected," she said, tone even. He looked her over, eyes narrowed. That's the trouble with being generous. One forgets what comes after. May didn't move. "If this is about the land, speak plain." "It's always about the land." He stepped inside without invitation, glancing around as if inspecting his own legacy. "I've come with an offer, one you'd be wise to take." From inside his coat, he pulled papers. Neat lines, crisp signatures, the scent of ink and old deals. "If you leave," he said, placing them on the table, "you get a parcel near the river. Yours alone. No name attached. No marriage needed." May stared at the page. The sum was generous. More than enough for a cabin, a garden, peace. "And if I stay?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll stay under my terms. You'll take my name formally, share in the estate. But you'll answer to me, not the boy." May picked up the paper, turned it over, folded it once, and set it aside. "I'm not afraid of starting over," she said. He leaned closer. "I gave you a life." "No," she said calmly. "You gave me an arrangement. Daniel gave me the beginning of a life." Josiah's expression hardened. "That boy is soft. He won't survive without someone steering him." She stepped forward, voice low. "He's not soft. He's decent. And that terrifies you." The rain began then, slow at first, then heavy, drumming against the windows like hooves across a field. Josiah turned away, pacing once, then twice, like a man trying not to admit defeat. "I warned you," he said finally. "Don't forget who holds the deed." May didn't reply. She didn't need to. He left as he came, coat dry, eyes dark, footsteps loud. But not all storms leave when the wind turns. That night, just after sundown, the smell of smoke reached her window. Not hearth smoke, something thicker. Burning hay. Splintered wood. May ran barefoot into the yard, the shawl forgotten on the porch rail. The barn glowed orange in the dark, flames licking at the sky like wild tongues. Horses screamed inside, their hooves striking panic into the earth. She didn't stop to shout. She just moved, through the smoke, through the heat, into the inferno. The stable hand tried to pull her back, but she slipped free. The animals were tied. Trapped. She loosed them one by one, coughing, eyes streaming. Fire snapped at her sleeves, clawed at her hair, but still she moved, steady, sure, not because she was fearless, but because the fear had already lived through her once and lost. One by one, the horses burst from the barn, Mamie soaked to sweat, eyes wild. She didn't make it out in time. The roof groaned, timber giving way, and the world narrowed to heat, smoke, and the sound of her own name shouted from far off. Then arms, strong and shaking, pulled her from the wreckage. Daniel. His coat was half-burned, face streaked with soot, but he didn't let go. Not when she collapsed, not when she coughed blood, not when the fire turned the sky behind them into a trembling sunrise. He held her all the way to the porch, wrapped her in the shawl she'd left behind, and pressed water to her lips like a prayer. "You're here," she rasped. He nodded, jaw tight. "I shouldn't have gone." "You came back," she whispered. He blinked fast. "They said it was sabotage. Someone started it." She nodded faintly. "Josiah's men? Maybe. Maybe not. Someone who thought you didn't belong. Someone who saw too much power in you." May looked at her hands, blistered, trembling, blackened in places. Still here. Still hers. Daniel brushed soot from her cheek. "I don't care what he says," he said. "I won't trade you. I won't treat you like part of a bargain." She tried to smile, but it broke into a cough. He held her closer, forehead resting against hers. "You don't have to earn your place anymore," he whispered. "Not with me. Not ever again." The fire hissed as the rain began to fall in earnest, putting out what was left of the blaze. People gathered, murmured, pointed. But May and Daniel stayed on the steps, unmoving, wrapped in each other and smoke and storm-washed silence. The world had burned, but something softer had survived. And in that smoldering dawn, May realized she wasn't afraid of being chosen anymore. Because this time she had been seen. The smoke had cleared by morning, but the smell lingered, ash in the hair, in the folds of blankets, in the walls that hadn't burned but somehow still felt scorched. The barn was gone. A blackened skeleton of beams jutted out from the soil, steam rising from what little hay had smoldered all night. But the horses had lived. And so had she. May stood on the porch wrapped in a blanket, barefoot on the cold wood. She watched the land wake. Crows circled in the sky, cautious. Somewhere far off, a new foal whinnied as if life had never paused. She touched the bandages on her arms and felt none of the old pain. Not from the burns. Not from the memory of running toward fire without hesitation. But from what came after. From what Daniel had said as he held her through the storm, not knowing if she would make it through the night. He hadn't said, "I love you." He hadn't needed to. He had said, "I won't treat you like part of a bargain." That was love, she thought. Not the hot and hurried kind, but the kind that knew when to wait, that stayed when it didn't have to. Daniel stepped out behind her. His shirt was wrinkled, hair mussed, eyes still half sunk with worry. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Only when I forget I'm still healing," she said. He joined her at the railing, their shoulders close but not touching. "They questioned Ellison this morning," he said, voice low. "The steward." May turned her head. "He paid the stable hand," Daniel continued. "Said it was meant to shake the roots a little." "He was trying to scare me off," May murmured. Daniel nodded. "Or make you look reckless. Like you brought danger." "And Josiah?" A long pause. He left. Rode out before dawn. Took only what he needed. Left the papers behind. May studied the horizon, where the fields met the sky like a promise that never broke. "He'll be back," she said. "Maybe," Daniel answered. "But he won't find the same people when he does." They stood like that for a while, letting the wind brush past, both too tired to speak of everything the fire had changed. But it had changed everything. The staff who once avoided her now brought her tea, without prompting. Neighbors rode in with baskets of eggs, fresh baked bread, cloth for bandages. They spoke to her with respect in their eyes, not pity, not suspicion. She hadn't asked for any of it. She'd earned it without even knowing she was proving herself. Later that day, Daniel found her by the orchard, her hands wrapped but moving steadily as she cleared away a fallen branch. "You should be resting," he said. "I've rested enough," she replied, brushing away dirt with her wrist. He reached into his coat, pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "Then take this, if nothing else." She hesitated, then took it gently. Inside the linen was a ring, not the thin band she'd been given at their first wedding, but a carved silver circle, delicate and strong, etched with a pattern of willows and firebirds. May didn't speak. "I asked a silversmith in town," Daniel said softly. "Told him I didn't want something that meant wealth. I wanted something that meant survival." May held it in her hand, turning it slowly in the light. "Why now?" He took a breath. "Because I don't want to live like we were arranged, or tolerated, or enduring something for someone else's legacy." She met his eyes, and they didn't look like a boy's anymore. "I want to marry you," he said, "with my heart, not my father's will. I want the whole town to see you walk beside me, not behind." May's throat tightened. She'd spent her whole life not expecting things like this, not because she thought she didn't deserve it, but because the world had made it clear she was the sort who carried burdens, not dreams. "I don't wear pretty dresses," she said, voice thick. "I've never cared for frills," Daniel replied. "I have scars." "I do too. Mine are just quieter." She looked down at the ring again. "You're sure?" she asked. "Once I say yes, I won't walk away again." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking." They married again under the burnt willow, its branches charred but still standing. The town came, every soul who'd ever doubted her or passed her on the road without a glance. They came in silence, in apology, bearing pies and fiddle songs and flowers picked by hand. Someone laid a blanket over the stump where the vows were spoken. May wore blue, her shawl stitched with gold thread that shimmered like dawn. Her hair was loose, her eyes steady. When Daniel took her hand, there was no tremble. "I see you," he said in front of them all. "Not as a wife given, but as a woman chosen. I choose you. Now and always." She didn't cry, but her voice caught when she answered. "I see you too," she said. "And I stayed because you didn't ask me to be less than I am. I stayed because you looked at my broken pieces and called them brave." The applause was soft, more a ripple of reverence than celebration. May didn't need noise. She needed the quiet truth of it. Afterward, as they stood beside the stump together, hands still intertwined, the mayor approached with a sealed envelope. "This was left by your father," he said to Daniel. Daniel hesitated. May gave him a nod. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single note, unsigned but written in Josiah's careful hand. "The boy you were is gone. The man you are, he chose well. Keep the land. Make it yours." No title. No signature. Just acknowledgement. Daniel folded it and tucked it away. The sky that evening was gold-washed, the kind of light that makes shadows long and soft. May stood by the fire pit, watching guests drift away in twos and threes, baskets in hand, laughter trailing like warm smoke. Daniel came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pressed his forehead to the curve of her shoulder. "We're building something new," he said. "We already did," she whispered. They stood like that until the moon rose, until the fields glowed silver and the wind grew still. And in that quiet, May thought of the girl she had been, walking alone through snow, saving strangers who would one day save her right back. She hadn't expected love, hadn't sought it, but it had come to her in the shape of kindness, in the voice of a boy who became a man, in the ashes of something that was never meant to last. And now she belonged, not as a wife taken, not as a debt owed, but as a woman truly seen. And sometimes that's the only miracle worth waiting for.